With the NFL draft over and done with, it is time to go out and give our grades to each and every single team. I have 8 videos lined up for you guys, each and every division, and letting you know how I felt about each and every team, what they did in their premium picks, their trades, their reaches, their steals. I wanted to give some context behind what these grades actually mean when I hand them out, and especially for day 3, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Days 1 and 2, the value and how good of a pick they were, but for day 3, I'm not going to sit here and hyper-analyze every single team's, 6th and 7th round pick and nitpick them and say, well, he was wide receiver 28 on my board and, you took him over wide receiver 24. It's like, at that point, it's just a little annoying to just go and nitpick every single draft pick. So most day 3 picks will be C plus, a fine pick. I'm not gonna like overly bury a team for that. C minus, I'll have picks that maybe I'm not as much of a fan of, but still, it's a 6th and 7th rounder. If you get a B minus, it's like that's a nice pick. I'm interested. I think that was a solid pick, a solid fit, decent value. If you get a B or better, and there was plenty of day 3 picks that got B plus, even A pluses in day 3, so that kind of scales upwards for how good of a value and how good of a pick that you made. I put in a lot of effort during this draft season, making sure I had like over 200 players scouted and got everything down, graded these things, and got the videos up to you as quick as I possibly can, so any support would be much appreciated. But I will be going through each of these teams in their divisions, I guess from worst to best, among the 4 teams. So let's get into our first team. In the NFC West, we kick off with the San Francisco 49ers, who are among my lowest graded drafts in the entire league. They come in at a C ranking 27th to 29th. I didn't love this draft, and something the 49ers have done over the past few years, with the exception of last year when they drafted Dominic Pooney in the 3rd round, a player I really liked. I mean, this team has loved to just go in the 3rd round and pick whoever, and it just not work out. This team has one of the strangest, 3rd round histories from 2019 to 2023. This team has just struck out on, every 3rd round pick, which a little rough, and I think they did it again this year, where Nick Martin in the 3rd round is pretty egregious. Drafting a linebacker who is very much in line with a lot of the other linebackers that got drafted in the 5th round, 6th round, and all these other later round picks, where developmental, maybe, but linebackers are such a tough position to draft, and, most teams either you get the Swessingers and you get the Jahad Campbells and you get your guys that you're really, interested in to be a higher floor player who actually has some NFL tools and some of the mental ability to become a starting linebackers, and then everybody else is mostly just you got to teach them a lot from the ground up. So to pick a guy like Nick Martin in the 3rd round when there were just so many other prospects that you could have drafted at not just linebacker, maybe later on in the draft, but also just at other positions, I felt like that was a bit of a waste of a pick. I didn't also love the Upton Stout pick, a lot higher than I would have taken him as well. So we started off with their 3rd round and kind of the biggest negative, which was I think they whiffed that 3rd round. But I mean, even if you go to the top, I don't think it was nearly as bad, but still not the best. You go at pick number 11, you get Mykel Williams, and it was very clear what the mission for this 49ers team was, it feels like, when you go and get Mykel Williams, who's arguably the best run-stopping edge in the draft, and then you get Alfred Collins, and you pick up a linebacker, you get CJ West in the 4th round, which I thought was a really good value pick. It's clear that this team, going with their first 5 picks on defense and getting a guy like Mykel Williams, they want to be able to stop the run. And this draft at least helped them in that area. I just don't think they helped themselves in really any other area of the team. And this is a team that has quickly become very depleted on talent and has some cap issues that they gotta work out, and they traded Debo and they're letting some other players go, and it's not gonna be long before Trent Williams is gone. You gotta pay Brock Purdy. They lost Dre Greenlaw, Hufanga. This team has a lot of holes and a lot of areas that they need to figure out, and I guess you gotta start somewhere. So good on them for focusing on the defensive line, and I guess Nick Bosa can be one of the players you could still build around for the future. I don't know how many of these high-end players that they're going to end up keeping around, and how many of them are they going to end up trading or letting walk or whatever. But on the defensive line, Michael Williams on his own is a very nice player. This is definitely higher than what I would have taken him. Williams, I really like him as a run stopping edge defender. I do think you can look at him and say maybe he doesn't quite have the athleticism of a guy like this, but maybe a ceiling could be something like a Montez Sweat, one of the better run stopping edges in the league. And a low end one, Montez Sweat, I do think has some number one moments and can get you 10 sacks in a season because he did do that. But, definitely somebody who could be a great co-star. Spending the 11th pick on that, I would have liked somebody who maybe does have a bit more game-wrecking potential. I did have James Pierce rated higher than Michael Williams. I also thought maybe, the tools of a Shamar Stewart could have been really interesting. I definitely understand the Michael pick, though. It's just definitely not the guy I would have picked at 11, and, someone who I thought there were, if you wanted game-wrecking potential, James Pierce, if you wanted some real tools, some real, because the 49ers, they got time. It's not like they're going to try to compete next year, I would hope. I don't think this is a turnaround type of team where even if this draft class, even if I'm wrong about it and they nail everything, they're right back into contention. I don't think that this is the type of team they're at that point. They're in this kind of weird state where it's like they're needing to transition into a different era of the 49ers, but they're just too talented in some areas to maybe bottom out, but I don't think they're good enough to compete. So they're in a weird state. I am curious to see what their overall strategy is going to be in the next year, where they're going to try to tear it down and just, trade everybody, trade Trent Williams, trade some of these other players, and just say like, hey, Brock Purdy, Ricky Pearsall, some of these other guys that we have as young players, Mike Hell, build around the young guys and try to build a new foundation? Or are they just going to try to force what the talent that they have here, because they still have Ayuk under contract. They just signed George Kittle to an extension. I'm fine with the Kittle extension. We'll see what you get out of Christian McCaffrey. Like, are they going to try to just, force an aging team into a different type of contendership window, where if that's the case, you're going to need some really good draft classes, and a quick turnaround only happens if in the next class or two you nail it. I don't think they did that here. I don't know if you're really counting on, even if Michael and Alfred Collins, who I do like Alfred Collins, even if they're really good, does that really give you excitement as a 49ers fan to say, oh yeah, we can get back into contention? It's just, I don't know, other than just saying, hey, we're trying to stop the run, we're building the foundation of this defensive line, what else the strategy is for this team, because I felt like maybe you could have broke it down a little bit, gotten a couple more draft assets and draft picks with trading players, or maybe you could have kept some other guys and decided, we can make a little run at the division at the very least this year. I'm really curious. The 49ers are just in this very interesting spot. Again, Michael, Alfred Collins, CJ West, thought at least that as a trio is something to be positive about. I just don't have any other positivity about the rest of this draft class. Like I already talked about, Martin and Stout in the third round, don't love that. But even in day 3, I didn't think they really did all that well. Jordan Watkins in the 4th round, do not love that. Jordan James, less egregious, but don't really love Jordan James in the 5th round. You took a safety. Curtis Rourke, I mean, it's a 7th round pick. I'm not going to get too critical of 7th round picks, but I don't know what you're getting out of Curtis Rourke as a backup quarterback. I don't even know if he'll be that. I don't love this class. I think if you walked in and said, we want to stop the run better, you at least accomplished that to a solid extent. But everywhere else, I don't think they really did anything to get me excited about this team. I don't think that the first 5 picks being on defense lets me think that they're going to be great on defense. I just think that they can maybe stop the run a little bit, but I don't love this. I don't know where the 49ers direction is. I don't know where they're headed. I don't know if they're going to try to compete or break it down. I'm really curious to what 49ers fans want them to do, or what you think they should do. Would you just say, break it down, McCaffrey out of here, Trent Williams out of here? Would you pay Brock Purdy in this scenario, in this instance? Would Brock Purdy be worth the money to give him and try to build around him, or would that be just more cap that you're taking away from the rest of this team? I don't know what you guys would do. I think that if everything does land, though, I'm at least interested in this front 7. Mike Hell, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, got some other guys here. Maybe Nick Martin wants to develop into a nice co-star linebacker, I guess. But, you know, I do think the front seven of this team could be pretty fun. But other than that, I don't love what they did. Then you get to the LA Rams, who had a very interesting draft because in the first round, a team that was looking to potentially trade down did just that. They traded out, got a first round pick for next year, which, cool. I mean, it's always good when you can trade out of the first round and get double up on the first rounders next year, even if, you know, there's some people down on next year's draft class. But I don't like to look a year out in advance and say, man, this draft class is bad. A lot can happen in a year. I mean, even just look at what we were thinking about this draft class a year ago. A lot changed. So I'm interested in any time a team can double up on first round picks in the next year's draft. So you get a little bit of a bump up because of that. Getting a first round pick is nice to have. And I'm not going to hold it against them that they didn't select in the first round this year. You know, what I always try to do with the grades is what you do with the picks that you have and not what the entirety of the haul that you leave with is, because some teams just don't pick as much as other teams. Terrence Ferguson, though, that was one of the bigger reaches of the draft, I felt like. Ferguson was like my tight end 8. Like, I don't love this one at all, and I'm at least not going to give it a D+, because I do see upside in Terrence Ferguson, and one of the reasons that I still had some interest in him maybe as a 4th round pick, and one of the reasons that I did have some intrigue in him as like a 4th round pick was, like, I think he has, you know, more than just generic average starting tight end upside. I think he can be a little bit better than that. I do see a guy who has the talent to maybe be a top 10-ish tight end. I just also see a guy who's got a lot to figure out, and I think there were a lot more finished products. I think there were guys who maybe had a little bit higher upside. I understand maybe not like Harold Fannin, you know, he's a very unique type of player, but I'm sitting there saying Elijah Arroyo maybe. I thought there's more to Arroyo to like. I think that, you know, this was around the time where Mason Taylor got taken, so it's like, okay, you're taking Terrence Ferguson around the time where Mason Taylor got taken. It's like, I think Mason Taylor had a lot more upside than Terrence Ferguson. And man, I just don't love this pick. This is just one of the bigger reaches in the draft for me. I don't think that Ferguson's going to maybe net you top 50 value. I'll trust Sean McVay and just say, like, hey, McVay's usually right about who he likes, but I don't like this one. Like I said, Ferguson was more like a 4th round pick to me. This was a guy who was like, maybe at the top of day 3 is when I'd start to think about Terrence Ferguson, but when I seen him come off the board at 46, I was kind of stunned. I'm like, excuse me? I think even if you flip their 2nd and 3rd round picks, I would feel a little bit better about it, because Josiah Stewart was somebody who was like, if you told me Josiah Stewart would go 46, I'd be like, yeah, I could buy that. I think a team would like Josiah Stewart enough. And if you told me Ferguson at 90, little higher than I would have taken him, but like, that's not egregious. So if you flip their first 2 picks, I feel a little bit better about it from a value standpoint, but it's like, okay, top 2 picks, you leave with Terrence Ferguson, don't love it. But Josiah Stewart at pick 90 is awesome. I think it's a really good pick, and this is a team that their defensive line, even in a post-Aaron Donald world, is just still scary. Jared Verse was a home run, Kobe Turner, and all these other guys. Braden Fisk was a nice little pick for them, even though I thought last year they traded up a lot to get him. It turned out to potentially work for them, so yeah, Josiah Stewart to the mix, and I mean, if he's as good as I think he can be, because Stewart was somebody who, I understand some of the concerns about him, and, you know, you don't love to take maybe an undersized edge rusher, but for any of these undersized edge rushers, I think Josiah Stewart has some of the best chance to become a really good player of all those other undersized guys, because, you know, more and more in the NFL, when it comes to getting some of these players coming out year to year, you see a lot more 6'1", 6'2" guys. So people in that area, you know, a lot of teams do prefer their edge rushers to be 250 plus or whatever. But more and more you see guys like Josiah Stewart come out that they're not as big, but I think Stewart has a lot of talent to him. Even still, for a guy like Stewart, he is just a shade under 250, and he packs that all into a 6'1" frame. So I don't even think that the size is going to be that big of an issue compared to maybe some other guys who come out. And I don't know. I really like this pick for the Rams, and he's definitely somebody who doesn't have to come along and be like an impact player early on. He's got plenty of good defensive linemen next to him. He's got Jared Verse on the other side. He's got Byron Young and some of these other players around him where he doesn't need to, hit the ground running. But if he does, I mean, even more scary for this defensive line. So you start with a pick I don't like, you start with then a pick that I really like, and then you go to the fourth round. Jarquez Hunter was another pick I really didn't like. It's funny, they have one of my least favorite picks of the second round, one of my favorite picks of the third round, then one of my least favorite picks of the fourth round, and then, as we'll talk about, one of my favorite picks of the fifth round. So they were all over the place. Hunter, I just don't get this one. Not only for the fact that you're looking at, Kyron Williams, you drafted Blake Corum last year, so running back wasn't like an immediate name. Even still, fourth round, you're not taking as much for need. You're taking for maybe talent. But even then, Jarquez Hunter was not somebody I thought was that much of a have-to-have player in the fourth round. He was, he barely cracked my top 20 running backs. And there were guys who were drafted lower than him that I thought were much better than him. And maybe you were thinking about a certain role, but I don't know what role Jarquez Hunter is going to fill for this Rams team. I just don't love this pick. At best, you're looking at a guy who, for this Rams team, will be a okay number 3, but I just don't see it here. I don't think Hunter was a fourth-round player, and I don't think if a team was going to pick him in the fourth round, the Rams were a team that could have used his services. So, don't love that one. But then the fifth round, I think everyone can unanimously agree that they really knocked that out of the park in the fifth round. Ty Hamilton, solid pickup, but the one you want to talk about here is Chris Paul, or Pooh Paul as people call him. I mean, we just talked about it with a team like the 49ers drafting Martin in the third round, and like 100 picks later, you get Paul in the fifth round, 172. If the Niners had taken Paul in the third round, he was one of those linebackers where I'm like, okay, even though a lot of linebackers are very dependent on the upside and still have a long way to go development-wise, it's one of the hardest positions to play in the league, I see it with Paul where it's like he has enough talent to go in the third round. Even if it is mid to later in the third round, I would still say, like, yeah, I'd consider him in the third round. Nick Martin was not a player that I would even touch in the third round, but to get Paul in the fifth round, there were definitely linebackers who had no business going ahead of him. Paul was one of the only linebackers that I felt was, like, notable. To me, he was, like, LB4. I really liked, of all the non-Swessinger and Jahad Campbell, who were the clear top two, the guys I really liked were Chris Paul and Danny Stutzman. Those were the two linebackers where I'm like, okay, if I'm betting on one of these guys to do something, I think it'd be one of those guys. I didn't love like a Demetrius Knight that much. He went in like the second round. I didn't love some of these other guys, some older prospects, undersized prospects. I wanted the athleticism of a Chris Paul on this team. So him being like the linebacker, him and Danny Stutzman being the two that I would bet on, them both going day 3, I think are great picks for both the Saints and the Rams. And to get Paul in the fifth round, that's just an awesome pick. One of the best value picks of the entire day 3 section. So I got to give them a lot of credit there because they just potentially stole a future starting linebacker in the fifth round. And I'm not going to be surprised. You look back in a couple of years and say, like, why did the Niners take Nick Martin 100 picks ahead of Chris Paul? And it's like, I don't think that's going to end up aging well for the Niners. So I do think that was an awesome pick. And then you get Kanata Buttonfield in the 7th round. Very nice 7th round receiver. He was definitely someone that I had some eyes on to get drafted. I think he was a draftable player. He was definitely someone that, could have went 5th, 6th round. Don't think it would have been bad, but to get him in the 7th round, really nice. This team, we'll see what they look like with their receiving core this year. It's going to be a little exciting. Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua. We'll see what some of these other players are able to give them. And then I guess you throw Terrence Ferguson into the mix. So this was an up and down draft for the Rams. You do get a little bump because you got a first round pick next year. And I dinged you for Ferguson and Hunter, but you get major credit for Stewart and you get major credit for Paul. And then Hamilton and Mumfield, solid other day 3 picks. Very up and down class. Maybe you like the Terrence Ferguson pick a lot more than I do. So if that's the case, you probably give this a much higher grade of a draft. But I don't know how many people are like over the moon for Terrence Ferguson at pick 46. I've kind of seen a lot of people being like, it's a little high for me. But, a B- still very solid overall draft class, especially considering you got two, I think, really nice steals and a first round pick for next year. And then these final two drafts are two drafts that I absolutely loved. We start with the Arizona Cardinals, who get a tier 2 6th to ninth grade for me, so a really high end class. And if you wanted to talk about a team who had maybe the best 1-2 punch to start off a draft, I think the Cardinals are in the conversation for that one. How about Walter Nolan at 16? So that in itself is an awesome pick. I mean, Walter Nolan was a guy who I had as a top 10 overall player. And, you know, the drawback with the Walter Nolan for sub was maybe it was not going to be as immediate with him to just come out, walk in, be a superstar. And that's the deal with him, is that maybe I thought it would take a little bit more time with him. You know, when you're talking about someone being a top 10 overall player, you're thinking instant impact. They have you know, maybe an all-pro potential, and they can come in and be a contributor day one. Walter Nolan absolutely could be a contributor day one, and maybe he does just come out the gate strong. But I do think I would, if I were a Cardinals fan, not expect him to just come out the gates being a superstar and saying, like, yeah, he was one of the best players in this class. He's got all this potential. You know, we float around the words Chris Jones when it comes to talking about Walter Nolan and the type of player he could become. I will say, I'm not going to be surprised if his rookie year is a little bit down, and I really hope if that's the case that people have some patience with him, because the stuff that he gives you is so rare. And, you know, and even in that case, if he does come out the gates and, you know, drops like a 10-sack season and goes nuclear, then I'm not going to be surprised because of how rare his gifts are. This was a dude who was one of the top rated prospects in the nation when he came out for a reason. And as soon as he left Texas A&M, and one of the common things I had brought up is, man, I hate judging Texas A&M defensive linemen, and I hate watching these dudes and seeing how badly they're misused. Well, the second he left Texas A&M and went to Ole Miss, he exploded. Is he a finished product yet? I don't think so, but man, the bend that he gives you from the inside, the way he's able to rush the passer, the things that he is able to do is not something you see in every year's draft classes, which is why the tools that he possesses alone make him one of the 10 best players in this class. So to get him at 16 for a team that really just needed interior help and needed just help on the defensive line in general, for a team that took Darius Robinson last year, I wasn't in love with that pick. I thought that was a little high for me. I thought he was a very solid day 2 player, but you know, you took him at the bottom of the first round. We'll see what he ends up giving you now that he is presumably going to be ready to go, healthy. I'll at least give him the benefit of the doubt and say, you know what, we'll count this year as like a proper rookie season for him. So you got him, you got Walter Nolan, you got some of these other guys that you've been trying to rebuild this defensive line with, and it could be a turnaround for this team, especially with, you know, getting Jordan Birch in the third round. So, you know, staying with the defensive line. I'm really interested to see, have the Cardinals completely turned it around, because also they went out in free agency and I thought got one of the better value moves in the entire free agency class, getting Josh Sweat. I thought Josh Sweat was going to command even more money than what he got, so to get him in a scheme that, one, he's familiar with, because you remember Jonathan Gannon was in Philly when Sweat was there. So you get him in a scheme that he's familiar with, you get him with a coach he's familiar with. I don't think it's going to be any shock if Josh Sweat comes out here and puts up a double-digit sack season for them. And this team now just has a bunch of bodies. I mean, Dalvin Tomlinson, Calais Campbell, they traded for Baron Browning. We'll see if B.J. Ojulari gives them anything coming off an injury. But this team now has bodies, and this team now has some serious potential on the defensive line. Just because, think, if Sweat can become a number one, at least a low-end number one, you have some solid contributors. If Walter Nolan can be as good as we think he can be, you get Jordan Birch, you get Calais Campbell, probably just for a year, but still, Calais Campbell can help you this year. You get some of these other guys, Baron Browning, you got, you know, hopefully Ojulari, who was a second-round pick, can give you something. Darius Robinson. Somebody's got to take a step up, and to throw that on top of a young defensive line with Calais Campbell to presumably mentor some of these guys, it's really exciting what this Cardinals team has built in the past year on the D-line. And then, I mean, as if going and grabbing one top 10 player in this class wasn't enough, how about at pick 47, Will Johnson, who also to me was a top 10 player in this draft class. Now, I will say that top 10 grade just comes from what you see on the field from Will Johnson. I very much understand that there has been some injury stuff to come out with him very much in the recent times where it was looking like he was going to be a first round pick, even though he played last year a little banged up and it wasn't as good. And then more injury stuff kind of piles up and he falls to the second round. And I mean, even still, it's a little crazy that he fell as far as he did. Even if Will Johnson, to me, is a guy who might miss the first couple of games in his rookie season, heck, even if Will Johnson is gonna miss the first like 10 games of his rookie year, I'd still consider taking him in the first round because he's just that good. I'm not taking a guy just for this year. You're taking this dude for 4 years, and if you're taking him in the first round, for 5 years with the fifth-year option. I'm not just thinking about today, I'm also thinking about tomorrow and the day after and saying, well, Will Johnson was one of the best players in the entire nation, and when he is healthy, is a truly great cornerback. I mean, there are still a lot of people who, stacking them side by side will say Will Johnson's a better corner than Travis Hunter. A lot of people said that, and a lot of people believe that, and there's a reason for that. He's just that good. Will Johnson being here at the 47th pick, I know injuries play a part, and unless, I'm not in the medical room, and I'm not in the interviews, and I'm not in the process and everything to say that if these injuries are, like, debilitating, are these, like, Ben Morrison type injuries, I from what I've heard, no, but, like, if he's going to be good to go and these injuries aren't long-term hurting him and it's just like a, just got to recover, miss maybe some time in training camp, miss some preseason games, miss a couple of regular season games even, okay, I'm fine with that. I'll wait. Will Johnson's worth the wait, even if it takes him a little bit of time. And maybe that is the theme of this Cardinals draft, because I said, hey, Walter Nolan could take a little bit of time, but he could be special. Well, Will Johnson, maybe it'll take a little bit of time for him to recover and be fully healthy, but it's worth the wait. So, I mean, I'll wait for Walter Nolan and Will Johnson to be a superstar duo. I'll wait for that. I'll happily wait for that, because you might have just found yourself a game-wrecking interior defensive lineman and a true number one corner with your first two picks. I don't see how it gets much better than that. Then you get Jordan Burch. They brought him up in the third round. Really nice pick. The rest of their picks in day three, not really anything to be super notable about, except I will say Denzel Burke intrigues me. He was a guy who I didn't have like a top 100 grade on or anything, so even me giving him a B grade is a little generous, but I am at least a little curious on a guy who maybe got his reputation a little crushed with some bad games, a not so good Oregon games, but he's put up some good tape before, and for a fifth round swing, I'll take that. I'm at least intrigued. Maybe Denzel Burke doesn't amount to anything, and those bad performances are going to be what overwrites him, and the fifth round is where he should have went, but I'll at least be tentatively intrigued, especially with, again, this is a cornerback room that's really young and full of opportunity. I mean, this team picked some guys that I really liked last year. I really liked Max Melton. I was so big on Elijah Jones. I think he got hurt last year. Garrett Williams took a step up and became a really nice player to close out the year. So, hey man, if you get Will Johnson to be a number one, Garrett Williams, you have Budda Baker still, you signed him, and we'll see who else can take a step up and if Max Melton can assume that other role. But somebody in this cornerback room with how many young guys, it's just the odds say somebody's gonna be really good, and Garrett Williams is already potentially gonna be that guy, and I think Will Johnson could be that guy. I think the Cardinals are building like a really special team right now on the defensive side of the football, and you could see that was the priority. You spent almost all your picks on the defensive side of the football, and after last year, getting Marv, I think, maybe some of the hype on Marv is a little died out because he didn't have like an explosive rookie year like Brian Thomas or Malik Neighbors or even Ladd, but I think Marv is still really good. I don't even think his rookie year was all that disappointing. He just didn't have an explosive rookie of the year type of season, but he was still pretty good. He just needs to get the ball a little bit more, I think. But I'm really excited for this Cardinals team. This is gonna be a fun team to watch on defense when you got all these young guys out there, and on offense, Kyler is always fun to watch. Trey McBride is awesome, and Marv, and I'm really excited. The Cardinals are going to be a team that I'm going to want to watch a decent amount of this year for both sides of the football. And then we wrap things up with the Seahawks, who they did get the slight edge over the Cardinals to get that A grade for me, and it was what gave them the edge was their day three. I think the the day 1 and 2 of the Cardinals was better, but the day 3 of the Seahawks, I just was in love with. And, I'll talk about those two A pluses in a minute, but, you start at the top. Obviously, you didn't get a Walter Nolan and you didn't get a Will Johnson, but Gray Zabel, very needed on the interior of the offensive line. I think this was one of the picks that was one of the more predictable picks of the draft, but predictable isn't always a bad thing. It's for a reason, and this is a team that needed interior offensive line help badly, and you took, in terms of a guy who's going to probably be a day one guy, the best interior offensive lineman. I think if you're just going, who's the best interior offensive lineman in the draft, it's probably Will Campbell, but Will Campbell is probably going to get a chance at tackle. So in terms of guys who day one are going to be interior guys, Gray Zabel was maybe the best one you could have gotten. I liked him a lot more than a Tyler Booker, and definitely for the fit too, I liked it more than Tyler Booker. So to end up with Gray Zabel at the 18th pick, very solid, fills up a huge need, and I thought Zabel was a guy who I slapped a round 1 to 2 grade on him, so maybe a tad bit higher than I would have, taken him from a value standpoint, but to fill the need, really good. You get a B plus there. And then a player I was really low on in the draft process was Emmanuel, who the Seahawks picked with the 35th pick. And this is a really interesting one because I'm basically going to be put to the test with my evaluation on Emmanuel, because my biggest drawback on him was, well, you are going to project him as a Derwin James, a Kyle Hamilton type of role player, where you throw him in the middle of your defense and you give him that superstar type of role where he is just able to patrol the middle, play the run, drop back and be sideline to sideline in the passing game and all that other stuff. In the Seahawks, who Mike McDonald defense, Kyle Hamilton, you're taking him to put him in that role, and everything lines up, except my drawback with Emmanuel, and I think which should be at least a concern a little bit, he didn't do that in college. He did not play that in college. Not very much, at least. That was just not his assignment at college, and that is objectively a concern. Now, obviously, you look at him and you say, well, he should be able to do that. Then the question comes, it's always a debate of, was he not asked to do that, or did he not do it because he couldn't do it? That is always a debate that comes up with certain players and certain schemes, certain archetypes, certain stuff like that. Why did a player not play the role that they are presumed to play? I understand it when maybe like you go up to Gray Zabel, for example, he didn't play much interior offensive line. He was a multi-year starter at tackle. Well, that's just because college teams like to put their best offensive lineman at tackle, and then, you can play tackle for 3 years in college, and then you go to the NFL and you're a guard because you're just not good enough to play tackle at the NFL level. You're a good enough guard. Safety, though, with Emmanuel, you would think you'd want to put your best player in the best role in the most crucial part of the defense. Every defense would love to have a Derwin James, a Kyle Hamilton, somebody in that role. Why did they not do that with him? Was it just because of a strict misusage, or was it just because he couldn't do it? I'm curious about that. With Emmanuel, I thought he was pretty nice in coverage with some of the aspects and some of the assignments that he was asked to do. I don't love him as a run diagnostics player. I do think that is a clear area of disconnect right now, where I think I said it in the top 100 video, his first step physically is fast, but his first step mentally is not, where he is able to, once he reads it, once he sees it, he shoots out and he'll make a play, but he doesn't always see it as quick as you'd like him to see it. That needs to get better. Now, if you're betting on, athleticism and mental, some guys athletically just can't have it, even if they mentally do. You think of a player who I think is very much on the other end of the spectrum, and another player that I really liked, Xavier Watts, not a great athlete, one of the smartest safeties in the draft. Well, you can get better mentally, you can't get better physically always. You can't get faster, you can't get taller. So you're betting on the traits with Emmanuel. He needs to get better mentally with his diagnostics and his first step and being able to trigger on that stuff quicker. That's where I do have my concerns with him. I had him rated lower than like the 35th player in the draft. I had him more as like a second round guy. I am at least inclined to say, well, if I'm going to trust somebody to mold him into the role that people think he can be, I'll go to the guy in Mike McDonald, who is one of the best at it. So he lands in a great spot that is undeniable. He landed in a great spot. I do have my questions. I do have my concerns. I am calming my expectations because I do think it will at the very least take a little bit of time. But he went to a great spot, and I am really curious to see if just South Carolina's a bunch of idiots and didn't want to use him in his proper role, or if it was just he couldn't do it, and that's just not what he is. You know, he was lower on my safety list. I had a guy like Kevin Winston rated ahead of him. I thought Eman Wari didn't always play up to his size a little bit. But I'm really curious to see. This is one of the more interesting fits in the entire draft where I'm like, man, if Mike Macdonald unlocks what that athleticism is and what he can be in that role, well, you found yourself a top 10 safety in the draft, or top 10 safety in the league in the draft. If not, is he just going to be all athlete? Is he going to be, Jeremy Chin? Because Jeremy Chin's a comp that gets thrown around where he's inconsistent. He has his moments. He can do some stuff, but he doesn't always get it right. He doesn't always, hold up well in certain situations. He'll blow a coverage. He'll miss a tackle. He'll have some headaches, but he'll also make some really big plays. And then you're thinking, well, could he be more Derwin James? Where is he going to be on that spectrum? Is he going to be closer to Jeremy Chin? Will he be below that? Will he be ahead of that? I think Jeremy Chin is more the realistic outcome, but there is always that opportunity for him to be even better than that. So I think at the very least, you're 2 for 2. Then you go Elijah Arroyo with the 50th pick, who Arroyo was a guy that I had some intrigue about with where he would go. Again, another one where it's like, man, that's really interesting. It definitely seems like this Seahawks team is out on a guy like Noah Fant. I was really hoping that Noah Fant could really have a breakout year or something. Didn't happen. They seem ready to be like, okay, yeah, we'll move on. Elijah Arroyo is going to be the tight end. Definitely has some upside. Definitely has some potential here. There was a lot of debates between Arroyo and Mason Taylor and who had the higher upside and who would you bet on. I was more Mason Taylor. Well, he was, I'm pretty sure, gone by then. So you go and get Arroyo, who I think in the second round, a little bit richer than what I would have taken him. I would have been more comfortable with him in the third round. But I mean, even, Ferguson went in the second round ahead of Arroyo. So at that point, I'm like, okay, I guess tight ends are just going to start flying off the board. Take Arroyo if you really love him. They do. I think he could be a really nice player for them, and this is a position of need for the Seahawks team. So I'm here for it, and I think he could be a really nice player for them. And, when you're trying to replace Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, I know Cooper Kupp long-term may not be that replacement, but you need somebody to go outside of JSN as a primary pass catcher. Arroyo could potentially be that for whoever the quarterback is in a couple of years, because I didn't love the trade of Geno Smith and signing Sam Darnold. I think he just downgraded at quarterback, but the trade becomes a lot more interesting when you trade Geno Smith for a third-round pick, and then you use that third-round pick to spend on a quarterback, which is Jalen Milroe. And again, the Seahawks just really smart with it. This was about where I had Milroe on my board. I think he might have even been like 92 exactly. He was like right at that spot. This is a great spot for him to go. Milroe needed to go to a place where he would be allowed to take time. He needs at least a year, maybe 2. You need to really work with him. Just all of the passing stuff needs to be worked on. I don't want to say from the ground up, but he needs a lot from a mental processing and a ability to just deliver in structure side of things. So for a guy who has all the athletic tools, has an NFL caliber arm, and is an NFL caliber athlete, and would probably step onto the field day one and be one of the better athletes at the quarterback position. I like that going in the third round to a place where he's not going to have any pressure on him is going to... I was worried that a team like the Giants would take him. I was worried that a team like the maybe Browns or whoever would take him and force him into a spot that he just wasn't ready for. Even though I like Brian Daboll and I trust Brian Daboll to develop, I don't want Jalen Milroe playing day one. That would be terrifying to watch. And for me, who I'm already not a big believer that Sam Darnold is going to be this team's long-term quarterback, I think you're very much looking at a situation where, hey, Sam Darnold, he doesn't have as good of a year yet as he has in Minnesota this upcoming season. He has just an okay year because he's just I think at the end of the day, just a okay He's one of the 32 best quarterbacks, but he's just an okay starter. Maybe doesn't blow you away. And then the next year, maybe Seahawks fans start getting a little antsy. We want Milroe. And I think maybe if Darnold starts to slip and lose control of the job and is somewhere closer to where he was in New York or Carolina, because I think it's unrealistic to expect him to play as well as he did in Minnesota. The situation of Minnesota was just perfect. Now, I do think it's also unrealistic to think that he'll play as bad as he did in New York. So it's going to be somewhere in between. But if it's closer to New York, if it's closer to Carolina, maybe midway through year 2, you could see Milroe. And I think by then, a year and a half, maybe by then, you should have some expectations that Milroe is playable. And then at that point, maybe you got your guy. Maybe you got your quarterback. But this is definitely a project, a patient project that you gotta wait for. Seahawks fans, please. I know Sam Darnold might be a little bit difficult to watch because he's probably going to take a lot of sacks and he's going to do some weird plays sometimes where he's just going to throw it into triple coverage and forget that he doesn't have Justin Jefferson down there somewhere. But let Milroe take his time. You got to be patient with him. You should not want to see Milroe in year 1 unless it is some like special packages for him, some goal line stuff, and then maybe if the Seahawks are like out of the playoff hunt, just play like a week 17, week 18 game, like a low pressure, nothing game. That should be the only time you want to see Milroe as a Seahawks fan. You do not want to see him play meaningful football. So I'm excited. I think the Seahawks may have their quarterback of the future because there's not many spots that I would have bet on Milroe to succeed in. Seahawks are one of them though. So that's already like your first 4 picks. I wouldn't say home run slam dunks, but all really good picks. Then you get Riley Mills in the 5th round. Solid stuff there. I'll kind of catch the other ones. Robbie Ontz, who's basically a fullback, 5th round. Get a tackle, another tackle in the 6th and 7th round. Ricky White in the 7th. So, pretty whatever picks. Then you go and just knock it out of the park in day 3, man. I'll start with Damian Martinez, I guess, because I will like to save Torrey Horton for last. But Damian Martinez shouldn't have been here. Of all the consensus top 6 running backs, I think the consensus top 6, whatever order you may have had them, Janty, Hampton, Henderson, Judkins, Scadaboo, Caleb Johnson, those were basically, like, whatever order you had them, those were kind of like the top 6 guys. Outside of the top 6, it was kind of like, well, who do you like? To me, I like Damian Martinez. I like Damian Martinez a lot, to the point where him and Baishal Tutin were like 7 and 8 for me. I really like Damian Martinez. It's like, man, this team doesn't even need a guy like Damian Martinez. You already got like Zach Charbonnet sitting there, and I guess maybe this is kind of post Zach Charbonnet. I think maybe the team would be willing to trade for Charbonnet because like he is good enough to be a starting running back somewhere. But Martinez is awesome. To get him in the 7th round, I thought the Cowboys should have been sitting there taking him in like the 5th round, 4th round. Like, he was a player that, like, if a team took him in the 4th round, I would have been, like, hey, good pick. You took a running back that you potentially need. The thing with Martinez, maybe not crazy upside, maybe not home run hitting play potential, big plays, but maybe a lot like Charbonnet, just really steady, really sturdy, really reliable, really solid. Not quite the pass catcher and pass play threat that Charbonnet has become in Seattle, but really good as a runner of the football. It's maybe a little bit more of a boring style, but really good still. Like, I think he is a running back who's good enough to potentially be a starter on a team. Like, I do think Damian Martinez is way better than a 7th round pick. It's crazy. Like, I don't know why he was here, because there were some running backs that I was just sitting there, like, scratching my head, like, him? One of them being Jarquez Hunter, who went to the Rams. Like, Jarquez Hunter over Damian Martinez? And some of these other backs, it's like, I don't know, man. I don't know why he was here in the 7th round. I think that one's going to look a little silly in a couple of years if Damian Martinez gets a chance with Seattle. And maybe he is the guy post Charbonnet to be the number 2. And we'll see how many touches he ends up getting. Maybe not as a rookie, but, later on in his career. I'm really interested to see what Martinez does. And then, 5th round pick, you go and take one of my guys. One of the players. Everyone's got those handful of players that they're kind of, really high on. They'll die on the hill for. One of these players that I really love in Torrey Horton. I had a little bit deeper of a breakdown of Torrey Horton. He was actually one of the players I think I talked the most about. So if you want a little bit more on Torrey Horton, you can go to the top 100 video and see what I said about him, because I had him ranked pretty high. This was a dude who I had as my 10th receiver, which I think was pretty outside of consensus. A lot of people had him, like a 4th round player. I had him saying more like I think I had him 2nd to 3rd or a 3rd round. I think I had him maybe a 2nd to 3rd round grade on him. I really love Torrey Horton. I think is just QB friendly, really talented, good hands, ball tracking, all these things that you could like in a receiver. Horton has. Good spatial awareness, sideline awareness. He's got some speed to him, and this is a dude who, if it wasn't for the fact that he got injured last year, probably would have been a day 2 pick, I think, because he was basically on track to break every Mountain West record, was really productive, was going to break all the school records, was going to do a whole bunch of stuff, and probably put up another 1,000+ yard season, and he got a season taken away from him. And when that happens, players kind of get forgotten about, lost in the shuffle. What have you done for me recently? But I don't think that should take away from what Torrey Horton has done in his previous seasons, and I don't think that takes away from the talent that he does have. I think Horton, I not comp-wise as a player and the type of player, but the type of production, the type of role, you can get Tyler Lockett production out of Torrey Horton. Lockett in his best years wasn't a 1,000-yard season, but in a lot of years, Lockett was 800, 900 yards, had a lot of really nice number 2 receiver production. And maybe that is high praise. I mean, Tyler Lockett's a dude who has 4 1,000-yard seasons to his name, so maybe not quite that drastic a production for a 5th rounder, but I think if, Torrey Horton is putting up 800, 900, maybe we'll sneak a couple of 1,000-yard seasons, and I think is long-term the other receiver next to JSN. I'm not going to be surprised. I mean, JSN is going to be playing a multitude of roles, going to be playing in the slot. Torrey Horton can play on the outside. The Seahawks need an outside receiver. Now, he's going to be nothing like previous outside receivers like DK. He's not like DK. He's not like Tyler Lockett. But his own brand of football is a brand that I really like. And I think he's just going to be one of those players that quarterbacks are just going to fall in love with. And just by nature of that, he's just going to see a lot of playing time. And whenever you need a go-to play, I'm not going to be surprised if Torrey Horton is the one making those big plays, those clutch plays. I just love Torrey Horton so much and believe in him a lot. There are a couple of receivers that I just believe in this draft class. Torrey Horton is one of those guys where it's like, man, I'm not going to be surprised if he's just a highly productive player in the NFL for a really long time. Maybe never hits the heights of a number 1. Maybe isn't a 1,200-yard receiver or anything like that, but can get you like 900 yards every year. I'm interested to see how much he'll play as a rookie, with Cooper Kupp on the team and with JSN, with what they're going to try to do with Elijah Arroyo and all these other players that they're going to have, and him being a rookie. I'm interested to see how much time a 5th round rookie in Torrey Horton gets, but I hope it is some opportunities because I think he can shine for this team. And just before we wrap this up, I wanted to take a quick peek to see what the moves they made, because I don't remember every move that every team made, but this team brought in Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They still have Jake Bobo. Gonna be honest, MVS, very much a role player, deep threat, but the path for Torrey Horton to play is, it's not a tough one. Can he get by Steven Sims, River Craycraft, Jake Bobo? I think that's very possible. I'm not going to be surprised if maybe Torrey Horton's the 3rd most productive receiver on the Seahawks as early as this year. So I really love what the Seahawks did. They made 2 of my favorite picks in day 3. And then their first 4 picks I thought were all really intriguing. You get a future offensive lineman, you get a future starting safety, you get a future starting tight end. Maybe you get your franchise quarterback. I think you get a future starting wide receiver and a really nice running back in Damian Martinez. And we'll see what you also get out of Riley Mills. So I love this draft for the Seahawks. It gets that A grade, one of my top 5 drafts in the entire league. So let me know what you guys think. If you agree, you disagree, was I too high on some of these Seahawks picks? Was I too low, maybe on the 49ers? Let me know what you all think, but we're almost done here. 8 videos in 8 days. It's a long process, making like a 40-minute video each and every day. Don't usually daily upload, but special occasions, call for it. So if you guys could like, comment, and subscribe, all that stuff, that would be very helpful. Let me know that my work was not for no reason. I hope you guys all enjoyed though, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.